Bonsoir tout le monde, bienvenue. Je vais débuter la soirée juste en reconnaissance territoriale. Alors, le Centre d'art et de diffusion reconnaît qu'il est situé à Tiohtià, Montréal, le territoire autochtone non cédé de la nation qu'à. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir exercer nos activités sur ce territoire et nous espérons travailler ensemble pour créer un avenir plus connecté. Je vais le lire en anglais aussi. The Centre d'art et de diffusion Clark acknowledges that we are located in Tiohtià, Montreal, the unceded indigenous territory of the qu'à nation. We are grateful to be able to carry out our activities on this land and hope to work together to create a more connected future. So I'm going to introduce Ivetta. Ivetta, I'd love to welcome you to the stage. Thank you. So Ivetta Sunyoung Kang is a settler artist from South Korea working across cinema, video installation, text, performance, and participation. Ivetta's practice takes place between Tkaronto, Toronto, and Tiohtià, Montreal. Kang obtained a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Film Production at Sang Myung University in South Korea and a Master of Fine Arts from Concordia University. She has exhibited work internationally, including at the Smithsonian Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, ArtScience Museum, and at Bao, among others, and was awarded the RBC Newcomer Arts Award in 2021. So welcome, Ivetta.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, well, I'm going to start with our first question of the evening. Can you start by introducing your artistic practice and sharing a bit about your inspiration for Indication of Melancholy Speech, exhibited in the Clark Postadio?
So I should use this, right? Okay. So, Indication of Melancholy Speech was sort of created within the scope of my kind of longest term project, which is called When the Others Leak Underneath Your Tongue, which was initiated in 2020, I think, early 2020. And the work itself, that work has like a 13 sculpture bodies with like music notes and then music box notations and also music box inserted on the sculpture bodies. So the work actually sort of has brought a lot of projects, with one of which is Indication of Melancholy Speech, I would say. So like, I think there is like a conceptual sort of tie between the two works or the other meta projects that are coming from the When the Others Leak Underneath Your Tongue. So one of them is like, I would say, music box Korean notations that you can listen to like through the QR codes, because those like music notations are actually playable when you play the music boxes inserted in the sculpture bodies for the other work. So it can be pretty confusing. So I recorded, like I sort of pre-recorded those notations, and then those are sort of compiled as this like QR code accessible sound pieces here as well. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. In which case, I think I'll jump to the question about the QR code pieces. So there's, in my opinion, a nostalgic quality to your installation and sculptures, which commemorate the fading mother tongue as you describe. Can you discuss your relationship to the different materials you've chosen, including the gathered materials and sound works linked via QR codes?
Not only this like Indication of Melancholy Speech, but it just happens that I've chosen a lot of like sort of materials that have this quality of playfulness. Like for example, the other work that I just like briefly mentioned, there are music boxes. And for another work that I made last year, I worked around like string figure, which is called cat cradle. So that's also like childhood, like it sort of holds childhood memories. So it happens that I have this like very kind of naturally occurring affinity with those materials, and as an artist, I'm still like asking myself why I am sort of bound to those sort of selections, I'll say. But I guess like I remember when I was like, because my practice really changed a lot in 2019, and that was the time when I was going through a lot of sort of contemplations as an artist, and one of the thoughts I was having was, I want to bring some playfulness, because I want to have like, for the lack of a better word, fun time within the setting that I as an artist create, like even in a gallery setting or museum setting or even just outside of the YQ. So that was like one of the things I really, really want to see being created with the audiences. So that's where the importance of participativity or participation is like sort of coming from, because I want my work to be more engaging with the audiences, not only as a kind of, also for the lack of better word, like a shallow fabric of interactivity, but more like physically engaging with the audiences and want to sort of give a massage to their childhood memories by like bringing this cute materials or like music box kind of material to them. So that was I think that was kind of like my subconscious or even conscious way of thinking, in this kind of selection.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, and that leads into my next question, which is, throughout your exhibition, you effectively subvert children's tools for focus, calm, and emotional regulation, such as music boxes and riddles, to express and transmute feelings of anxiety. Can you discuss the deviance inherent in this practice of subversion, and whether this might be an act of resistance in the face of oppressive systems and dynamics within culture? And I know you just shared about the playfulness behind this, and yeah, I'm curious to hear if there is a resistance there as well.
I'm sure it's a sort of an act of resistance, whether or not I like really regardless of the degree that I really intend as an artist. But I guess like when I sort of brainstorm some ideas for like a new project, I happen to think a lot about universality and the particularity around this like my personal everyday life as a marginalized being. Or like all of my memories that are sort of oppressed intentionally or not intentionally by like certain social structures. And when it comes to this like my contemplation around like universality and a particularity. Wait, what was the question? Yeah, I remember. When it comes to that kind of contemplation, like sort of personally speaking, when I had my anxiety, for this kind of anxiety symptoms or like even any kind of mental health regarded issues, we know that we need to talk to a therapist and like sharing with friends whose symptoms might be similar or something. So I've had a lot of benefits from this like coping mechanisms, I would say. And then that was when I was thinking, if my symptoms, personally speaking, if my symptoms are shared with my friend's symptoms, then I feel like I'm not alone. I'm not just left alone here, because she can also share the symptoms. And then we can, like, by talking about it, I was like sort of feeling some of my symptoms, a lot of my symptoms were sort of getting ease. So that particularity, in my opinion, also particularly sort of coming or rendering to be a universality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Yeah, part of what I'm hearing you say too is that your choice of materials speaks to your own personal process with like managing your experience. And when experiencing your installation, one thing I really enjoyed was there's this sense of irony where you're referencing these tools from childhood that would be used to calm and that to some degree maybe use in your own life to calm, but then at the same time you're expressing, like the sentiment being expressed as melancholic. And I thought it was a beautiful way to allow yourself to take up space. And you're taking up space with complex emotions and not just the positive ones. But in a way that still has a positive effect because others can relate, like you said.
Yeah. I'm really glad like you used the word irony, because I think irony or like paradox or something that are like sort of taking a pretty important concept in my practice as well. Because like even some of my work, like in my research, I read a lot about like psychiatry studies research, like essays, those like clinically driven papers. And when I read them, I feel like, for example, my anxieties got better, but also in the back of my head, they are just like clinical scientific numbers or measurements that are just collected by some, like some people with some privilege, so to speak. So there is like this irony that I, as a person who is going through this anxiety, has to deal with somehow. And that doesn't, I don't think like, not only as an artist, but as a person, I don't want to say that those like scientific measurements are useless, because they are helpful for sure for a lot of people. But it's like acknowledging that there is irony between like in terms of me navigating my own position, my own coping mechanisms, my everyday life with the scientific measurement is ironic, and it has to be acknowledged. That's sort of the paradox that I want to embrace, I think, within my practice. So like for Indication of Melancholy Speech, speech sounds like really clinical term, but melancholy also like it's not a clinical term. So when
poetic term.
Yeah, so when I put them together, there, like I said, there's like a certain ironic sentiment coming out of it. And I think I enjoy it, looking, feeling the irony coming out of it.
Yeah, these tools that you speak of, like psychiatric essays, and these sort of scientific tools have value, like the true value in them is when they're embodied. And I think that leads to my next question, which is about the embodiment of these things. Let me find the question here. Yeah, in Indication of Melancholy Speech, the human body and its parts are used as physical markers of the anxiety you've experienced in relation to speech and cultural dynamics. Can you discuss the role of the body in this exhibition and throughout your practice?
After I received this question, I was like, that was a pretty good reminder for me to go back to, like all of the projects I've made and created. And I know I'm a kind of nerd, like towards these images of hands, because I made Proposition 1 Hands in 2019. So because like I have a sort of a series of propositional projects that started in 2019, and the first proposition was titled Hands. And then there are like many video works of mine that somehow captures images of hands. And I still ask myself why I'm like, sort of clinging to these images of hands. But maybe my answer would be, I studied cinema and I was a big fan of Bresson's films and Tarkovsky's films, where a lot of different various like images of hands were captured as a means of sort of carrying some like delivering emotional flows of the characters. Maybe that was like somehow affecting my choices. And then it sort of moved on to also like it sort of speaks about my personal interest in somatic experiences as well, somatic movements or performances. Yeah, and then like for Indication of Melancholy Speech, it was a really fun kind of iteration for me, because I needed to go back to my personal diaries that were written in 2019 to 2020, even like up until 2022 or something. And then I had to rediscover what kind of poetic relations I made between my anxiety symptoms and my body parts. And that was a really fun discovery, like self-discovery. But I guess like terms of sort of its relation to social cultural effect or like even society hierarchies or structures. I'll be like looking at my hands and I'll be like reminded of all kinds of part-time jobs, like hard jobs that I did. So it is a bodily signal that what kind of life or iterations of life I've been sort of going through. So that's the way sort of I see some kind of politics emerging into personal and personal merging into politic together, embodied in one's body.
Thank you. We'll move to our next question. I think there's something so relatable. I was excited to discuss this for many living in Montreal about this notion of speech anxiety and feeling severed from the ability to communicate one's ideas confidently without the barrier of a compromised or aphasic tongue. As you mentioned, can you discuss aphasia in relation to your exhibition and its relevance as a metaphor for your experience?
Yes. The first, I think, the part that I want to talk about is when I was reading a lot about like psychiatry papers, I came across this psychiatry studies publication called TSN, I think. And it's still like they published this year the 5th version of it, and it still categorizes like like language anxiety, like speech related anxiety, because as an adult you learn like a second language, so there are like tons of words that you don't know, but you want to say something, so you feel like going back to your childhood, that where you weren't able to say something, and they categorized as a speech disorder, which is really funny and ironic. So that was like one of the kind of inspirations I got, because it was really nonsense. And also, like, to give more context, this publication categorized queerness as a disorder 2 years ago, and they got rid of it. So they are still working on it, I think, and they have a lot of like things to relearn and work on it. So this ironic was like sort of speaking to me. In another context around the question was, I lived in Montreal for 8 years, but I don't speak French. So there's like this personal sort of layer coming to it. I want to say something, but also like I learned English as my second language at like 27. And there's another like layer around French. So that was really oppressing me, whether or not people actually like said something harmful to me, that like for the fact that I didn't speak French. It just that really didn't matter, because of these social structures that are around this language policies was already a lot to me. And then I remember when I was living here, or even like I live in Tkaronto now, but English being my second language, I still feel like a little tingling sensations on my tip, like tip of the tongue, and that I want to acknowledge that, like sort of pull that out, and I say that I'm feeling this. And when like you said, I was really happy to read the question, because you said the part is like relatable. That's where, again, like the kind of universality around this can be also felt by me when like reading the question. And aphasia is like a mental illness, I would say, because they're like for diagnosed aphasic patients, I'm sure it's not super fair to say like use the term as a metaphorical sort of term. But still, I want to use it as an adjective, not as a noun. Yes. Yeah, I can go on that, yeah.
No, that makes sense. And to give some context, so aphasia is a disorder where, from what I read, a part of the brain is impaired in such a way that affects one's ability to speak and access words in their vocabulary. But also, I really enjoyed when you were talking about how you'll be searching for words and the struggle to find them in a language that's not not your first language brings you back to moments in childhood of learning language. I think it's nice to learn that information in relation to your installation that has that nostalgic aspect, where there are found objects from childhood. Yeah, I feel like that just helps, knowing that helps to engage me more deeply with the work. Yeah, knowing that in the present moment, you're experiencing this recall to childhood in your experience of language.
Yeah, it's just also, like you said, like there is another layer of irony that English being my second language doesn't mean that Korean is like my first language. It just doesn't really correlate. Like apparently it doesn't work like that from my own experiences. English is my second language, but also since especially I moved to Toronto, it's becoming my first language, but that there are like a lot of sort of internalized behaviors or demeanors that are really tied to this like Korean, the language, and the society as well. So there's like a lot of, I'm still finding, I guess, like I'm sure there's like no answer to, for me to navigate all of this like layers coming from English or French, like this multilingualism. So when I made the work, actually this work is the first work of mine that has Korean words in it. And I think it says something to me personally, it speaks something.
I think one thing that I've enjoyed in researching your work is there's so much nuance in the way that you just described that just because English is your second language doesn't mean Korean is still your first, or when you describe the sensation of feeling a tingling on the tip of your tongue as you search for words. There's this, in the way that you make those really subtle sensations, that you bring them to the surface in your work, there's like an intriguing kind of sensuality in that of, I think that was maybe where my question about the body was kind of coming from initially, as I really sensed this like subtle, sensual involvement of the body as you're, like the anxiety you feel, you're locating it on these really minute parts of the body, like the tip of the tongue.
I personally find, like if I feel anxiety, my hands would be like shaking. I'm sure you also like experienced or seen that, when you do like presentation at a university, you're nervous. That's why you have to say it. Oh, I'm nervous, and then that the nervousness sort of gets easy. So like when you pinpoint some parts that are feeling certain symptoms of anxiety or like your language, whatever, like struggling with languages, when you pinpoint it, somehow like you reenacting or enacting or even like enunciating that it's here, it stays here, is for me it's kind of a self-reflexive treatment or coping mechanism.
That makes sense, like locating a feeling on the body and bringing awareness, like kind of like it creates a boundary of, okay, I've located it there and I'm going to move on. And I'll move into our next question as well. So throughout your practice, you question the notion of the body being reliable, exploring its fallibility in a neo-colonialist or colonialist context. Can you discuss the role of social and cultural hierarchy in your work? And I know you touched on this a little bit, but we'll go into it a little more. The role of social and cultural hierarchy in your work and the impact that it has on our perceptions of our bodies and sense of validity as you explore this in your practice.
I feel like this question can be unfolded in really different multiple layers. Because like one of my questions that I ask myself a lot is, what is this body? Because I look like Asian person, but I don't identify myself as a Korean. But I find like a lot of sort of comfort by identifying myself as a Korean Canadian, but I don't look like Canadian. So like there's a lot of political or social narratives that are just created because of the body, like the body I have.
it's like socially speaking, the body is an oversimplification of who you are and the way that it exists socially. But then on the personal realm, of course, the body has like so many incredible possibilities. But socially, from what I'm hearing you say, it feels like this oversimplification of your identity.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah, it brings in me like a lot of questions actually, like not only as an artist, but as a person, you know. I think you put it in a good way. Thanks, Ivetta.
Well, move us to our next question, actually, which is our final question, I think. I think we already asked these ones. Yeah, we did. Okay, so in your body of questions titled A Pile of Unanswered Questions, you ask, which future of my humanity do I strive for? Upon reading this, I couldn't help but think of the sensation you describe in your journal entries in the installation about once grieving and resenting your mother tongue. Can you discuss this duality and fraughtness as it exists in your work?
When I was reading the question, the first word that sort of came to my mind was love and hate relationship. And I think that sort of speaks the idea around like duality as well. I think that's my relationship. Although like the sort of certain degrees of this love and hate relationship with my mother tongue, or my body, or like my identities, like all kinds of labels that I carry every day is shifting, like different degrees, different tones, different temperatures every day. But I think, again, sort of acknowledging that I'm carrying this duality or love and hate relationship because I'm not gonna abandon it. I'm not gonna just like, you know, give all of my empathy and sympathy to like this Korean mother tongue or any kind of demeanors that are coming from it, or other people labeling me only because of the body or the language. It's just always kind of finding a good balance between just like, you know, social labels. And in terms of this like love and hate relationship, in my practice even, I think the idea around neutrality sort of became important lately. I don't think like I want to make a statement as an artist in my practice. Of course there can be statements, but subtle. But also I can talk about my own sort of personal emotions or personal thoughts when they stay as personal, but I know like when they are presented in the public setting, they are not personal anymore. So it's also like sort of shifting, sort of like, you know, finding a shifting boundary between the public and the private. And love and hate relationship. Yeah, I think I answered the question in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. And I was thinking as you were answering that one thing I'm noting about your work is while you're not making an explicit statement with your work, it's like your personal stance still very much can be felt in this way of resisting like classifications that are on one side of a polemic, resisting being labeled. And yeah, whether intentional or not, I do feel this kind of like sticky sense of just resistance there of not allowing, and you do so subtly, but yeah. Anyway, yeah.
It's just one of my like core research these days is around like knowledge generation studies and epistemology studies. And then I was really falling in love with this book, Epistemology of Closet by Ivetta Sunyoung. And that was where the inspiration of using the cabinets was actually coming from. Cabinets are used for classification, labels, sorted out. I'm not saying they're unnecessary or useless, but they are, so the purpose of cabinets, closet, is to classify, like put things here and there. And then what if in like in my practice, artist practice, what if I dismantle it a little bit and make holes around the cabinets? That was kind of my own personal and also artistic resistant act and performance that happen on the cabinet.
Right, like allowing yourself like that little bit of destructiveness and making the holes. And also it comes back as well to that duality that you mentioned in your practice where the cabinet you're referencing, there's like a scientific tool of classification through the cabinet, but then also the cabinet that you chose feels very domestic. So it's this reference to your personal experience as well, which is equally important. It is important in the work. So yeah, I mean, with that, I think that concludes our discussion. Thanks for everyone. And I think thank you, and I'll give us 5 minutes before beginning the next discussion.